You think of all the experiences and sensations that you've noticed, both this segment and other segments. What draws your attention right now? I've got the weight. You take his coccyx out of the way. That's it. And you probably would have noticed some differences in before and after the lesson this morning, during the lesson this morning, the ATM, and during the exploration of each other, sensing the movement of your legs and the connections between the floor-foot joint and your hip joint and your pelvis. So bring your attention to your feet and notice how your weight is distributed over your right foot and your left foot. What sense you have of your legs stacking above your feet? Do they feel like stilts? Lines? Or is there a sense of shape, movability? And as we were talking about in terms of sitting postures, does it feel like where you are right now is your legs have a configuration that could change easily, lightly or softly, or not so? And then how does your pelvis sit above your legs? You notice anything about the orientation of your pelvis? Whether your pelvis is a little tilted forwards, so your tailbone is more backwards when your lumbar spine is arched. Maybe it's tilted the other way, so your tailbone is more tucked under, and the back rim of your pelvis is further backwards relative to you, relative to what in you? So the more references we can get for gauging relationships and sensations, the more accurate our constructed reality is likely to be. And what about the sideways direction? Do you feel that one side of your pelvis is a little higher than the other, or one side a little lower than the other? So begin to move your pelvis a little right and left. Move yourself from your pelvis. And does your attention go to your feet or the line of your spine and its shape? And what's the relationship between your head and your pelvis through the length of your spine? And then a little forwards and backwards. So right now we're not constraining your movement to a circle on the ceiling, which will likely evoke a particular configuration. But now begin to move your pelvis in a circle. So I really like Ruth's lesson image of the cocktail duck. I've not seen it on a cocktail glass, but I've seen it on a tall gin and tonic glass. And I use it a lot with clients because this idea of this pecking bird that tips as one piece, and as its head goes to into the drink, the tail goes up. And so people can begin to get a sense of that relationship as something goes down, the other goes up in equal proportion, if you're maintaining the shape within your torso. So change directions if you haven't already. And just notice, is your head going in the same direction as your pelvis? In the opposite direction of your pelvis? In an out of phase, same direction as your pelvis? And what's happening between your head and your pelvis? Okay. So now you've got something, a movement that we could connect to a daily life action. And we did in a way in terms of feeling your weight on your feet. We move our pelvises as we walk, but we've done it in standing to feel what directions in space and we can move ourselves in. So it's something to come back to. So lie on your back for now and listen to the floor. And being able to come back and being able to observe whether your organisation has changed or your movement has changed is dependent on how accurately you identify or can describe or distinguish something about how you move yourself from your pelvis in the now, in the previous activity. And it is a skill. A skill that you can practice. A skill that you can practice in relationship to awareness through movement or in relationship to life. I mentioned Alain de Botton last week, and he talks about how do you keep a majestic scene or landscape. How do you hold on to the beauty of that, the awe that it inspires? Or how do you keep connected to an experience that's you really like, it's pleasurable, perhaps even exquisite? And there are many ways of doing that. And the more keenly you can identify the feelings inside yourself, the state of yourself, the cues about what it is visually or the environment, the more you connect your feeling, your thinking, your sensing, your acting, and sound, all of you, in the experience, and return to it, practice it, the more you'll develop that skill. Notice how you're relating to the floor right now. Sense the way your pelvis is lying. You have more of an image today, in some way, of the volume of your pelvis, the shape of your pelvis. What about the length of your spine? The volume of your spine. We can have an idea about how we are, but to truly, and it's our subjective experience. When we've habituated to sensations, we can have an idea in that way, some way, and it not be perhaps how we are. So it can be enlightening to discover something when your colleagues touch you. The more you can use the feedback of the floor, the feedback of your relationships, the feedback of your self-image in any particular moment, to more and more identify, does it match? Are they congruent? The more accurate a perception you'll have of yourself. Roll your head a little left and a little right. Notice what's present there for you right now. Any echoes of sensation that would indicate signs of connectivity or life through your vertebral column in the direction of your pelvis? And let your head come to quiet. And bend your knees and stand your feet. Gently roll your pelvis a little headward or upward and a little downward. So when you roll your pelvis upward, your lower back, the top of your pelvis, moves towards the floor. Your sit bones move away from the floor. When you roll your pelvis footward, your back upper rim of your iliac bones will move away from the floor, and your coccyx comes closer towards the floor. Observe whether your feet are assisting you in the movement, and how this action travels upwards through your spine in the direction of your head. Have any sense of your head being rocked on the floor at the end of your spine through this movement initiated from your pelvis? And then rest a moment. Please bend your knees, and this time put the soles of your feet together so your knees are open to the side. And begin, do the movement of rolling your pelvis a little headward and footward. And notice how it is in this configuration. I didn't know which one you wanted. Did you check in with the position, placement of your feet relative to your pelvis? Okay. And rest a moment. So as we were saying yesterday, and today, if you feel strain or fatigue, then pause, come back. Because while you're sensing those things, or pain, you won't be learning too much. Now, if it's something you've never experienced before and it feels like a stretch, again, rest out of it frequently. It's not likely to hurt you doing these particular movements, but if you do it for too long and too much, it'll create strain in the tissues over time. So rest as often as you need to. Come back to the sole, lying with the soles of your feet together and your knees open to the sides. And begin to explore turning your pelvis so that one thigh moves closer to the floor and then the other. And go slowly so you feel, how is it today? How are you organizing yourself to do this today? And where do you begin? Do you begin in the hip of the direction of the leg you're moving towards? Or do you begin with your other leg? Okay, so let's try. Some people are doing this. And you can do this, but it's a different action. So have your soles of your feet together. As you roll your pelvis to the right, bring your left knee towards the ceiling so that your left foot comes to stand on the floor. Then open your left knee to the side, pass through the middle. As you go to the left, bring your right knee towards the ceiling and stand on the sole of your right foot. So that's not what we're doing. Okay? It's one way of doing it, but you might not, when you do that, how is it using your lower back? Does it use your lower back? Okay, then leave your knees open, leave the soles of your feet together, and roll or turn your pelvis a little bit right and a little bit left. So one knee and thigh will get close to the floor, the other knee and thigh will be lifted away from the floor, but only as much as it is turned through the pelvis, or if you have discomfort in your hip, that you need to change the angle in your hip. And then observe what moves away from the floor through the length of your back. Do you have any sense that as your right knee goes towards the floor, your pelvis is turning to the right, that the left side of your lower back arches a little bit more and your ribs start to twist? And how does that carry through to your head? Does your head move to the right or left with your legs? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And if it does it go in the same direction as your pelvis is turning, or the opposite? So either are possible, and others are possible too. So you could try keeping your head still. Don't let it move. Maybe you reduce the size of the movement. That's one way of keeping it still. Another way people keep it still is by pressing the back of the head backwards into the floor. And then we have a little bit of cross motivation, because if the head is pressing backwards, it's engaging the extensors to extend the back as if the head could go through the floor, while you're rolling the pelvis and lowering one thigh to the floor. So just see, does it help? And what about turning the head in the same direction as the leg that's lowering? The direction that your pelvis is rolling in? See what that's like for you. So it's not sliding the feet right and left. It's lowering the thigh towards the floor. Now you could also slide your head. So do you remember the movement of your head that you incorporated in the lesson of tilting the knees in the first week, where your head turned, but as your head was turning, your head was sliding backwards, the back of the head was sliding backwards? So as you roll your pelvis, as your thigh goes down towards the floor, your head would turn in the same direction as your pelvis is turning, but the back of your head would slide in the opposite direction. So each of these variations might highlight something for you, or might draw your attention to a different possibility, a different shape that you can make, or a different sequence of involvement, or a different initiation. Okay, leave it rest for a moment. So what makes most sense through the structure of our skeleton in a biomechanical sense? Usually we turn the head with the pelvis in the same direction. But I'll just fess up here and now that I was an expert. Anything that could be done in a way that was less than efficient in use of my head and neck, I knew how to do it well. And even after I started to understand what could happen, the possibility of the skeleton, I could still sense that that wasn't what naturally happened for me, spontaneously. Until gradually over time I began to tease out what I was doing that made that, the way I was using myself, necessary to do the action in that way. So it's not about making yourself do it differently or doing what you think is right, but investigating and exploring. How is it different? How do I feel differently when I do this? Does this feel easier? Or is this harder? And over time asking the questions, is this more efficient? Was this what a skeleton would do? It was pulled along through its skeletal linkage. Okay, so come back with the soles of your feet together. Knees open to your sides. Again, move your pelvis, turn your pelvis so you move one thigh closer to the floor a little bit, and then the other. And notice what's happening with your head. How do you begin this? How do you initiate this movement? Is it your lower back, or your head, or your eyes? It can be difficult to notice. So let's try something. As you move your pelvis in one direction, you roll it or turn it, let your head go in the same direction, but turn your eyes in the opposite. So if your right thigh is going towards the floor, you're going to roll your head to the right, but your eyes are going to go to the left. And then everything comes back to the middle. Does that change something? Do you feel it stops the movement of your pelvis? Go back and take them in the same direction again. Check that your pelvis is really rolling and turning, and that even if your thighs don't reach the floor, that's your intention. So just checking in, the soles of your feet are together. The soles of your feet are together. Remember we talked about what the purpose of that was for? That bringing the legs in this configuration, to move the pelvis, you need to mobilize your lower back, your chest, your whole spine in a very different way. So turn your eyes with your head and your pelvis, everything in the same direction again. And maybe you'll notice you go a little faster. Okay. Let it rest. Let yourself rest, or take a pause. Is there any part of you that feels relieved to have the pause? If you identify a place that feels relief, it could be a sign to rest earlier. You could also use it as an opportunity to observe that place. Because if some places feels relief to stop working, it's likely it was working too hard. So when you return, well, where else could you could highlight that area with your attention and think, feel, sense what other places through the length of yourself could you bring into your action that could assist that part that needed the rest, or that wanted the relief of not doing this. Please come back to the same position, configuration, soles of the feet together, knees open to the sides. Bring your right hand underneath the small of your back, palm down, and continue to turn your pelvis. And I say turn, I say roll, it could be tilt. And feel what's happening between your hand, the back of your hand, and your ribs and your pelvis on your right side. So you're still moving your right leg towards the floor, then your left thigh towards the floor. Does having your hand under here change the movement, make it asymmetrical in the right and left directions? Does your head move in the same way it was before? Can you move your eyes in the opposite direction to your pelvis again? So as your pelvis rolls to the left, your head might roll to the left, but your eyes are traveling to the right. So your head is in the same direction as your pelvis, rolling in the same direction, and your eyes are looking opposite. Then eyes in the same direction again. Then before you lengthen your legs and take a pause, slide your hand out from underneath yourself and move your pelvis in such a way to bring first one knee down towards the floor and then the other knee down towards the floor. And then let it go and rest. Leave it alone. Notice how you feel your self lying on the floor. And then roll yourself up to sitting for a moment. Come and have a look at the skeleton. How many of you are finding this difficult? Yes. I would say 90% of you. So let's see if looking at the skeleton can help you see a connection, feel a connection that's challenging when you're exploring your own. Maybe we could have the lights on so you can see him a little bit. Now his hips are, he's got the sort of hips that if you roll the pelvis, they're actually going to act counter to the freedom, to the congruency of everything moving together. So this is what you're being asked to do. So how do you get to lower your thigh towards the floor? What strategies have you come up with? We've got this. Okay, so that's moving your legs on your torso. So well, if you, no, it's not the idea. It's good that you notice it. Well, what it does is it tends to extend the hip a little bit. So you'll have a feeling that the knee is going to the floor if your leg is close to the floor, which I think yours are.
Yeah,
you've
that
got,
wasn't the idea.
Yeah. Okay.
My knee forward.
Just, sorry, one at a time.
I think I've come up with extending towards the opposite shoulder, like diagonally.
So would you say, if I understand you correctly, you're extending this knee?
Like
what direction?
To come to come down with this knee,
Mm-hmm.
sort of extending through up there.
Mm-hmm. So what happens through here when you do that?
It sort of comes down, but also lengthens.
So there's an arching through here.
Yeah.
Would you like to show us, Anko? Would you mind? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think? Looks like a pretty good option. So if you see here that her back is arching, that her leg is, yep, and come back. Yeah. And that the shortening and arching and twisting here is allowing her pelvis to tilt and turn. That brings her thigh down to the floor. So, and you can rest for a second. That's great. Thank you. So she's not using her distal limb. She's not using the muscles distally to move the proximal parts of herself. She's getting a proximal organisation in order to move her pelvis, which is influencing the direction of her legs, which is the whole story, in a way, behind this series of lessons.
But my head was counteracting at the start.
Counter, but it didn't look like it was then. No.
But at the start.
So often we do extra things with our head and neck and shoulders that it takes time to recognise it's not necessary. It takes time to recognise that we're actually doing something there. But usually the clues are given through the lesson where you have an opportunity. If it's possible for you, you can give up that work. Maybe it's not possible today. Any questions?
So did you think of the movement starting from the shoulder?
No, I think it's still coming from there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sort of one.
Just with the diameter.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was having a real sense. Also, like, that makes perfect sense, and also the this flexion. I had a sense of when you were describing those deep abdominals the other day, which
Mm-hmm.
leverage into here and can pull that leg up.
Mm-hmm.
That contraction pulling this side of the hip up.
Could be. But in this organisation, that could be acting synergistically or cooperatively, but we're really learning to use the extensors of your lower back, which is why it's so foreign for most people. You've got a different relationship with gravity. You're being asked to turn and twist your back in relationship to a floor, which is something you probably haven't done for since you were about 3 or 2 or 1. So it feels, really challenging. So yes, there is an opening, maybe even a lengthening across the front. There's any number of nuanced possibilities that could happen. But primarily, we're looking at this. So the hand under here was to see, one, it acts as a constraint when you go that way. And once you've had a constraint and you take the constraint away, often it creates a freedom. Did anyone notice that? That it was easier to go in one direction after the hand? Great. It still wasn't looking so easy from where I was observing you. Yeah, forgot what I was going to say. That's okay. Martina?
I noticed and I couldn't really figure out. I played with different options. The one was, like you did, with the hollowing, but also with having the knee more going this direction, which I found a little bit easier than to lift everything.
Would you like to lie down and show us what you were doing? So you said just then you were thinking of your knee?
And I was playing with both knees.
Uh-huh.
With
So
this one almost a bit hollowing, but sinking the knee.
Okay. Can you put one foot on top of the other? Okay. Okay. And now think of... So Martina's got a strategy of lifting her pelvis, which can... Okay. Can you do it without doing that?
Without lifting?
Yeah. Just see if it's possible. Now, think of lengthening this knee. That's what I heard you say. Think of lengthening this knee. There you go. See? Don't have to make it such hard work.
Yeah, that seems much easier.
Great. Did you know you were pressing with your feet?
Yes.
Like that? Okay, good. We hadn't got to the variation that was going to inhibit that.
That's why you put the one foot on the other to stop pushing
she could
down
feel.
towards the floor, or pushing
Mhm.
into each other down towards
Down
the
to the
floor.
floor.
Can you visualise it coming from the hip joint at all, or not really?
Opening the hip joint. But if you're opening the hip joint by squeezing the buttocks, it's not going to engage your back in that way. Do you want to show us? No? Okay. Because it's hard for you. It's Michelle is struggling a little bit with some pain at the moment, so it's hard for her. Okay, so yes. What you're doing is a yes.
Yes, but it's not right.
Well, no, it's a yes. It's just the language didn't quite make sense to me. But when you do it, I can see that it's part of the pattern. So go again. So you see Vishali is actually thinking about sending her hip joint this way, opening a hip joint. And again.
I can feel that,
Yeah,
here.
it's great.
I wasn't sure then whether I was using.
You are using a little bit of your back, but you're being careful how much and how you're doing it.
Yeah.
But the movement is a fractal, a piece
Yeah.
but just in smaller degree of the pattern. That's absolutely fine. Anyone else got a question?
So I'm a bit confused because I was actually using a lot of core.
Would you like to show us how you were doing it? Because when you look at each other as you're learning.
Yeah, because by seeing her, I thought, no, I wasn't doing that at all. I was doing something else.
That's
So it
okay.
made
We'd
me-
love to see what you're doing, whether you... However... Uh-huh. Yeah. Is it that weak side again? It's that weak side, Madavi. Okay. So, yes, let's go that way. So to your right. Uh-huh. So that's how you were doing it?
Yes, and I kind of lifting my shoulder as well.
Yes. Okay. So if you think now of what you saw Anka doing, you try that way. See if it's any easier. Uh-huh. Go that way. Yeah. And now roll your head to the right as well. Yeah, so your nose turns to the right. Your nose turns to the right. Uh-huh. You don't know what you're doing? So, if you don't know what you're doing, what do? I mean, it's hard with all people watching you. Then it's more difficult to sense yourself in your usual way. So there's that aspect.
So I'm kind of twisting and
Yep.
letting my
Yep. Can you?
hip drop down.
Mm-hmm. And can you feel this arching here?
Yes.
Yeah. And come back. So
While I was doing like that.
you were doing several things at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of here, a lot of here.
And your belly, your back weren't working together in the same direction. Could you do it the other way again?
The way I was doing
Yeah, yeah.
it. So I was
See if you can. That's pretty good. Can you see there's a moment of tightening in her abdominal muscles and lifting her shoulder, which is kind of contradictory, which can make it feel more difficult. Yeah. But it's, you know, that's really clever. Some people, once they've felt something easier, can't do the other way. And you actually want to be able to do both ways so that your nervous system has got choice. So you don't want to get rid of one, but you want to be able to do one way and another way and another way.
So they're not the right way, but it's more.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Now let's see what the other side can learn.
Oh, it's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough. Well, let's think. So ooh, that's interesting. That's clever. So think this knee, that you want to point it towards me. You want to send it towards me while you roll your pelvis this way. There you go. Well, I'm not working hard. Is that tough?
By keeping your hand here gives me idea of moving.
Yeah. So how about we do that and you get a partner and just play with that a little bit.
That was quite amazing when you just
Yeah.
did the same spot with her. There was such a difference in feeling.
Yeah, it's just filling in her image. And sometimes it's that easy. Other times it's not. Yeah, yeah. And your experience in these lessons, everything you struggle with will serve you later on. And it's such a flip switch in one's brain. You know, we think if we haven't got it, there's something wrong with us, or maybe I'm a slow learner, or I won't get this, or maybe I'm not in the right, whatever it is that places we can go. But everything will serve you. Okay, so get together with a partner. Use your hands to guide, to follow their movement. You've got an idea of what we're looking for, so you can give little suggestions. But go for a ride first. See what difference that makes.
Can I ask one thing?
Mhm.
I mean,